Coming up on the Threat Status Podcast, we talk to retired Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies about how to fix U.S. shipbuilding and the potential problems U.S. troops could encounter in a ground operation in Iran. And then we break down President Trump's address to the nation about the Iran war, the potential impact on gas prices in America, and the failure of Chinese defensive weapons in both Iran and Venezuela. Don't forget to go to WashingtonTimes.com and sign up for the daily Threat Status newsletter. Hello and welcome to the Threat Status Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Wolfgang, national security correspondent here at the Washington Times, and Guy Taylor, the national security editor here at the Times, is back on the show this week. And of course, that's great news for all of us. Welcome back, Guy. And coming up in just a few minutes, we have one of our favorite people in Washington, retired Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, coming up on the show to talk about the future of American shipbuilding, what a ground operation in Iran ought to look like, and a lot more. So stay tuned for that. But Guy, before we get there, first things first, as always, what's on your radar right now?
Thanks, Ben. It's great to be back here with you on the Threat Status Weekly podcast. As always, I'm tracking a range of things out of the gate. I'm pretty amazed by NASA's launch of Artemis 2, this historic space mission that's sending humans way out around the moon for the first time since 1972. That moon orbit, as of taping this episode, is on pace to occur, I think, on Monday, April 6th. Definitely pretty cool to look at NASA's website and apps because you can kind of track how many miles the astronauts are from Earth and how many they have to go to complete the mission. And it's a little bit mind-boggling. Another major thing that we're tracking at Threat Status is how this whole Artemis mission is really now at the center of U.S.-China great power competition for who will colonize the moon first and ultimately take the lead in setting the rules for space over the coming 100 years, rules over things like mining on the moon's south pole. And so on. I digress for now, Ben, because I want to talk about President Trump's epic fury operation against Iran. One thing, though, before that has to do with this U.S.-China rivalry is that we published a story by our own colleague Bill Gurr. It's digging into how badly Chinese air defense systems have failed in both Venezuela and Iran, and how the Chinese Communist Party is apparently purging officials over this. I hope listeners will go check out that story. In the meantime, President Trump finally gave a speech from the White House on the Iran campaign, basically trying to sell it to the American people. That was on Wednesday, April 1. And Trump indicated that he wants the war to end, but that U.S. operations are going to continue and likely grow to a crescendo over the coming days and weeks. So I've been focused on what does that actually look like right now, or what might it look like? The Pentagon is deploying the full spectrum of military forces to the Mideast at this point. That gives President Trump virtually unlimited options in deciding how far to push the war against Iran. We just published a deep dive by our own colleague John Seward on how the 82nd Airborne, 75th Ranger Regiment, and elements from the fabled Delta Force are all already in the region, while U.S. Navy SEALs and 2 Marine Expeditionary Units are also forward deployed. The menu of possible missions over the coming days and weeks ranges from seizure of key Iranian islands around the Strait of Hormuz that are critical to Iran's energy sector. And then there could be more complex operations targeting Iran's nuclear materials. Speculation is particularly rampant around the possibility of this nuclear material seizure mission. And it would be complex and difficult, as U.S. operators would need to remove more than 1,300 pounds of material from Iran, nearly 440 pounds of 20% uranium fissile material, and another 880 pounds of 60% highly enriched or close to highly enriched uranium. There's also the weight of special casks that would be needed to properly contain this radioactive yellow cake. This is like a hyper dangerous mission in an already active war zone. I actually want to know what your take is on this, Ben, as well as your thoughts on Trump's speech, the first really like White House remarks that he's given since starting this campaign.
Well, that's right. I mean, it was notable just for the setting and the fact that he delivered this speech. I mean, these are the kinds of speeches we've watched how many times, whether it's President Obama announcing U.S. strikes against ISIS or George W. Bush talking about the Iraq War. That Oval Office video of the commander in chief on all networks talking to the American people is something I think we've been waiting for now for almost 5 weeks. I didn't hear a lot of clarity in terms of where we're headed and specifically exactly what these U.S.-Iranian negotiations, supposed negotiations. Trump mentioned just hours before the speech that Iran wanted a ceasefire. We didn't really hear any details about that or exactly where that aspect of this story is headed. But, you know, what I've been hearing from sources is that there is actually a split inside the administration about what to do with these ground operations that you just talked about and that John Seward wrote about this week in the Washington Times. And there's a number of different reasons why, but the one thing that kind of immediately jumped to the front of my mind, guy, is, you know, I sat back and thought to myself, looking back on it now, was Operation Midnight Hammer, this U.S. mission last June that targeted 3 Iranian nuclear sites at Isfahan, Natanz, and Fordo, was it a mistake? I mean, at the time, it was hailed as a huge success, and it was, without question. I mean, from a military point of view, we've detailed on the show a number of times what a feat it was for the U.S. to be able to pull off that mission and to do it successfully without any casualties or any hiccups at all. But now, as you say, Guy, you have casks, heavy casks full of this stuff. You have these enriched uranium, all these sites. A lot of them are buried under rubble. Pieces of the nuclear program buried under rubble, hard to access a lot of this stuff. So now you have an already difficult special forces mission, potentially going into enemy territory to do this stuff. And you're adding on top of it, potentially almost a construction job to move rubble out of the way to get to these things, which by the way, you're not even 100% sure exactly what's there to begin with. So I think from a macro perspective, I just couldn't help but wonder if, you know, if hindsight being 2020, if you had the chance to do it over again, would it be better if those facilities were still standing? At least then in some respects, it's more straightforward. You can go in and get it. Still really dangerous, incredibly complex missions. Don't get me wrong, but maybe we would have been able to avoid the part where we'd need heavy construction equipment to kind of help get this job done.
I think also just what you said first, Ben, about the fact that this is a active war zone. It's not, you know, it's not as if there is an example of this being done, I think, in Kyrgyzstan in 1991. That was like a month-long mission in coordination with the Kyrgyz government. That's not how this is going to play out. The Iranian regime is not going to be there to help get those trucks in and dig. You know, so this is something. Just even teasing it out is something we're not really hearing from from Trump administration officials. It's not being talked about. The types of press conferences we're hearing out of the Pentagon, which isn't even really providing a list of targets that have been hit at this point, are just sort of, you know, the campaign has been immensely successful and sort of just missing some of the realities of what's at play.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, one of those realities for sure is the danger to the U.S. forces, of course, who would be on the ground expected to do this. If Marines seized Karg Island or Iranian oil infrastructure or certainly these nuclear sites, they would almost certainly come under attack from Iranian drone swarms. And let's face it, the reality is U.S. ground troops haven't had to face those drone swarms in combat in the ways that Russians, Ukrainians, even North Korean troops at this point have had to face them in the Russia-Ukraine war. So it just leads to all these questions. Do we have easily transportable counter-drone capabilities that individual units would have with them on the ground? Have they had enough training to know what to do if swarms of 50 drones are headed toward them? And let's be honest, a little uncomfortable to talk about, Guy, but we can just say it here. It's easy to mount cameras on these drones. We've seen that, of course, in Ukraine, and we can't have a situation where all of a sudden there's video footage circulating on social media, maybe being amplified by Russian bot networks or China-linked actors of drones striking American forces, creating chaos, disrupting missions, or God forbid, killing people. That's obviously the tragedy, any loss of life, injury. That's number one by a long shot. But to be painfully blunt here, there is a public relations aspect to this, and that would be a complete nightmare from a political and geopolitical perspective for the United States, certainly for this president. So I can guarantee you, the president, the defense secretary, the joint chiefs of staff chairman, secretary of state, on down the line, they're all thinking about this and trying to be as close to 100% sure as you can in an active war zone that a situation like that isn't going to happen if the president decides to order these kinds of ground operations. And we are joined now by retired Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and senior director of FDD's Center on Cyber and Technology Innovation, among many other projects you're involved with, Mark. But all that stuff's going to have to get bumped down your resume because you are the first three-time guest on the Threat Status podcast. So I'm sure that's among the highlights of your career. Thanks very much for joining us once again.
Thanks. Is there a belt I can carry around the room for that? All right.
There should be. Right. There should be. If there's not, we'll get on that right away. Mark, I want to start with Iran. There's a million different angles here. And look, things are moving so quickly that it's sometimes counterproductive to try to drill too deeply into one specific development on any one given day. But broadly speaking, I'm curious where you are on this idea of ground troops, quote unquote, ground troops in Iran, because that term, of course, I think makes a lot of people think of Iraq or Afghanistan, hundreds of thousands of personnel, lots of casualties. But is the 2026 definition of ground troops different in your view? Can technology, drones, robots, AI kind of help the U.S. accomplish things that human beings used to do? Can the footprint be smaller? What do you think of when you think about ground troops today in this context?
So I do think it can be different. I am not excited about ground troops if it begins with the words Marine Expeditionary Unit, or if it begins with 82nd Airborne, or brigade level units. I just think, or regimental level units. I think that is a risk to force and risk to mission that is not consistent with this president's commitment to the campaign. And what I mean by that is, if you go ashore, there's clearly risk to force in the new warfare. We were not ready for long range drones, Shaheds against missile radars, against AWACS planes, against airfields, against command and control centers. We're not ready yet for the counter UAS in a FPV, in a small, kamikaze 5, 10, 15 kilometer drone environment that Ukraine and Russia are fighting, and that Iran has the FPVs for, I think. I don't want our troops getting killed. So the risk to force is high. And I'll say this about this president. He does not like troops killed on his watch. So I really believe when that argument is made, he will be opposed. But the other part's risk to mission. If you put troops ashore, I don't think people understand that with the current buildup size we're at, that would pull the air power and maritime power to wherever those forces were. It would become the only line of effort. And we're supposedly working 5 or 6 lines of effort right now: counter missile, counter drone, counter naval, counter air defense, although that one's pretty wrapped, counter IRGC leadership, and counter nuclear weapons program. You start putting boots on the ground for whatever that actual objective, that'd be one of those objectives, but that's it. So risk to mission, risk to force are both severely hampered by ground forces in the traditional sense. Now, if you told me ground forces were dudes who we don't acknowledge in the intelligence community and concurrent Israeli versions of that, going in somewhere, grabbing nuclear material or destroying material, destroying scientists' study work areas in Pickaxe Mountains or Isfahan, and then being extracted and us finding about it after the fact, I'm cool with that kind of ground operation. And that may be the more modern version of ground operations, supported by traditional air power, but enabled by, what we've learned over the last 25 years, where we and the Israelis are, you got to acknowledge kick-ass operators at that kind of special ops mission.
How confident are you at this point, Mark, based on what you're seeing, public reporting that we're all seeing in terms of what we've actually done with destroying Iran's military capabilities, whether it's ballistic missile production, drone depots, all these things, like, because look, we all remember President Trump saying that the nuclear program had been obliterated, and 8 months later we were back at the negotiating table talking about the nuclear program. Is there a danger we're making the same mistake on a much grander scale right now?
So let's be clear. Let's take our battle damage assessment from Admiral Cooper, not President Trump. I mean, President Trump has proven his inability to use appropriate terminology, terms of art, and to misuse them on occasion. So it set him, and that's okay. He's president, set him aside. He has a great team in General Kane and Admiral Cooper. Listen to them, but particularly Admiral Cooper. And what I would say is, I'm not sure what the original strategic objective was here because the president bounced around so much on it. But clearly, regime change is not yet in the offing. But what is in the offing is changing the regime's ability to impact its Arab neighbors, Israel, and U.S. national security interests. And how do you do that? You do a 3, 5, or 7 year work back of their ballistic missile capability, drone capability, maritime capability, nuclear capability, air defense capability, and IRGC facilities. And those are all moving along. I got to tell you, the ballistic missile one, we have destroyed their production capability capacity, and I believe the same for drones. That ballistic missile one will take years, 5 years to rebuild. The drone one, much easier, judging by how fast Russia built 2 Shahed factories. Maybe that's a 1 to 2 to 3 year work back. And then the maritime is 5 or 7 years. You don't build a Navy, so yeah, big differences.
So what do you do then at the 3 to 5 or the 7 year window? You mow the lawn again? And if that's the case, isn't that a strategy that just kind of sounds like endless war? I'm asking because I agree with you. You weren't as sharp, but what I see on the strategy front, the rhetoric out of the White House is, I'll just call it incoherence. Whether it's a weekend war or I don't even know what the goalposts are. I know they're moving constantly. So
you can sell me on a significant mow the grass war campaign. You'd have had me. If you told me that was it, I'd have gone along with it because I think they're that big a threat, the Iranians. That would not sell the American people who don't know what the term mow the grass means in terms of Israel and Hezbollah and Gaza and elsewhere. The reason I'm okay with it is I think other forces come into play when it's that extensive, 3, 5, 7 years. Then you can create the conditions for potentially, protesters or activists taking power. Then you can, if you do that properly, and if we control the Straits of Hormuz at the end, which would be part, the natural extension of that, then the Iranian government is severely weakened. It can no longer threaten others, and its tools for manipulating its own population go way down. And then the IRGC is in trouble because the IRGC is 125,000 people in a country of 90 million. It's 800 to 1 in the, membership versus population. That is something you can overcome if we created these conditions. Look, other things have to go along with it. We'd have to be tough. We have to say we're maintaining air power over we in Israel would do combat air patrols. Maybe we'll get Europeans to help us with that, almost like a Northern Watch. You are not reconstituting a military. China and Russia are not coming to help you. We are going to control how much of your oil comes out. That is how you win this, but that's going to take a lot of persistence, and resolve. Yeah, thanks. That's the right word, resolve. A lot of resolve from the president. And we're using words, Guy, that make me uncomfortable in today's environment.
I want to shift gears. You are a retired U.S. Navy Rear Admiral. We are, despite my pretty sharp criticism of Trump a minute ago, we are at this moment where there's all this rhetoric that comes out of this administration and from this president about revamping the U.S. Navy, U.S. shipbuilding in a way that's pretty inspiring for anybody who covers that side of the defense industrial base. There's talk of, Trump's golden fleet. You could pick it apart or not. My question for you is, as we move into these major shipbuilding initiatives, what is the number one challenge in revamping the U.S. Navy's shipbuilding capacity? Is it that we don't have the manufacturing manpower, or the not enough workers are trained? Is it that we don't have enough manufacturing facilities? Is it that we don't have enough money allocated? Or is it that the acquisition process for the Navy is just basically broken to a point of being sort of legalized overspending, teetering on corruption? Or is it some combination of all of these things?
Yeah, I'm going to take D, all of the above. And I'm going to add to it, though. Let's first make clear Trump's strategic vision is correct. We need a golden fleet. We need an investment in the Navy. We need an investment in shipbuilding to make that Navy happen. And most specifically, we need investment in the surface forces because we understand the submarine force. The aircraft carriers has a congressional caucus that makes sure it gets done. So what's left is, and the bill payer at all times has been the surface Navy. Where I part ways with the president's on the battleship, I just think in the end we're going to get, I don't think we'll ever do a battleship. I think in the end it won't happen. But let's say the first one gets done, and that'll be it. 24 billion. For that, I could have 12 DDGs. I could have 1,200 VLS cells or 124 VLS cells. I could have 1,200. I could have 12 Aegis radars or one. I could have 12 Aegis combat systems or one. We've been arguing for distributed fleet for 15 years. It's the right argument. And then this goes contrary to all of that. So first thing is I wouldn't do the battleship. What I would do, the president's and the Secretary of the Navy got exactly right, is we need to turn to Japan and Korea. Initially, the first 3 or 4 in a Korean yard, well, that Korean yard works with a new American yard, not one of our traditional ones, a new one. Gets the workforce right, the modernization right. We invest some of our Golden Fleet money in there. The company invests, the American company, the Koreans invest. Then you build the next 15 or 16 oilers or ammo ships or hospital ships. You don't build that many hospital ships. Command ships, you don't build that many command ships. But, those kind of ships in those yards. The Koreans are building at 30 cents on the dollar on these support ships of us. We won't get 30 cents on the dollar because of union differences. We'll get 50 cents on the dollar. But that's going to matter when you get 2 ships for every one, delivered on time, not a year late. That matters. And that's what we're going to get if we do that with the support ships. The final thing I say is the frigate's wrong, too. I would not look. Something was wrong with Fincantieri's Constellation class, and what was wrong was the Navy changed the metrics, changed what it was so aggressively. The one they just picked, the National Security Cutter. No ASW system, no VLF, vertical launch system, no Aegis radar, no sound mounting. Dollars. That thing's going to double in cost.
I see it in other arenas, like with the collaborative combat aircraft, all that fight between General Atomics and Anduril. Like Anduril's version of this thing isn't even stealth, and yet the Pentagon is like they report that they're buying it. So you get this. Like disinformation or misinformation about things like this advanced system that all this money is going to get spent on.
Let me say one last thing about shipbuilding. Look, Secretary Hegseth, who I'm critical of in a lot of areas, did have a great discussion of how to reintroduce innovation into the procurement system. And I'll take him at his word that he is going to reduce the no risk methodology, strategy we got going. That he's going to allow program executives to take risk, to succeed or fail, come back on small programs. That isn't shipbuilding. Shipbuilding are inherently very large programs where you have to manage it properly. So this really requires going to different yards that already do it right. We're not going to be able to, in my mind, kind of incentivize the current 5 or 6 U.S. private yards into changing their behavior overnight. They'll change their behavior, but they'll change it because it's a competitive environment where they're having to compete with Japanese and Korean companies that are kicking their backside.
Mark, you mentioned Defense Secretary Hegseth. I want to ask you a question about him from a different angle because, look, you obviously spent a lot of time in the military. You worked on Capitol Hill. You're now with FDD. You spend a lot of time talking to people like me and Guy in the press. I'm curious whether you think that the Pentagon, under Pete Hegseth, that the Pentagon's relationship with any of those entities, Capitol Hill, think tanks and civil society, the media, has that been irreparably damaged, harmed, or changed by this administration, whether it's restrictions on press access, partial gag orders on who can talk to the House and Senate, limiting think tank engagements, which you and I have talked about before. Do these things just get rolled back and forgotten by a new administration, or do you think the toothpaste is out of the tube, so to speak, and the Pentagon's relationship with kind of the rest of Washington might be changed going forward?
So has it been harmed? Yes. Has it been changed? Yes. And do I think Pete Hegseth cares that I have that opinion about either one? No. Is it irreparable? No, I don't think so, because I think these are professionals, and the press system will be reinstituted under anything but a Trump continuation presidency. I think tanks don't matter. So whether they come back or not, the think tanks, I hate to say it, we don't matter. The press and Congress matter. That's the oversight that the American citizens deserve. And the Congress will reassert itself. I'm disappointed in this Congress. They have been critical. They have requested things. Like I saw Senator Rounds is working hard on this whole AI Claude issue. He wants this, but he's too polite. I think because it's his own party, he's deferential and polite when he shouldn't be. That thing got out of control fast. And look, probably the CEO of Anthropic was 50% of the problem. But Pete Hegseth and his undersecretary were the other 50% of the problem. And like, Will Ferrell would say on Anchorman, man, that got out of control fast, right? That no need. And by the way, thank you, Anthropic, for helping us wax the crap out of the Iranian military for the last 4.5 weeks. Be clear, Anthropic is the AI driving that massive planning, the speed of planning, the target, the ability to sort through the target, and particularly on we're starting to move from deliberate targeting into dynamic targeting, and you're really going to need this. And so, from my perspective, I'm hoping that we can kind of get back together, put that toothpaste back in the tube over the next couple months.
Mark, I have another one. This is Guy again. I just looking at things being pushed to the back burner, this and that. I mean, the Russia-Ukraine war is actually raging. We were in this kind of spring offensive period, both sides claiming major attacks. The Russians appear to be trying to move the massive front line on the ground in eastern Ukraine. Have we, the United States, missed the window of opportunity to help Ukraine achieve something resembling a victory, or at least pressure Russia to a point that it has to make a deal favorable to Ukraine in some way? In other words, could the U.S. policy moves right now, today, and moving forward still have a real tangible impact on this war, or has that window passed?
No, so it hasn't passed totally. What I'll say, it's passed for the next 5 months. Russia is going to conduct a spring-summer offensive because Putin wrong-headedly thinks he can make significant gains here along the fortress belt. I don't think he can. My assessment, I just got back from a couple weeks in Ukraine. I think that they're in a strong position. I think that they maintain their military resilience and their societal resilience. They've gained some land, the Ukrainians. I wouldn't put too much in that either. I think this is going to be they lose another 0.1% overall of Ukraine in 2026. What the president needs to understand is his assessment of this conflict is wrong. Putin does not hold the cards. Both sides hold the cards. And if you want to resolve this issue, he's going to have to eventually bring the pressure on Putin. I would have hoped that learning that Putin was giving intelligence on targeting U.S. ships and aircraft to the Iranians would have been that moment. But he was fairly dismissive of it, which caused his, Witkoff to be dismissive of it. And they're in there bear hugging the Russians 2 days later. So I do think by the end of 2026, I have to believe the president desperately is going to want to solve this, and he's going to recognize the pressure has to be put on Putin. He's gotten all the concessions he's going to get out of Zelensky. By the way, he's going to be told by all his Arab partners, who he does like, the president, that Zelensky guy hooked us up, because Zelensky has rolled in with people and counter UAS drones to help Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, even Kuwait or Qatar, Bahrain to lesser degrees, to help defend themselves. As I recall, Saudi Arabia is sitting on like a goose egg of like 13 or 1400 Patriot missiles. They could probably slide him a few here and there and not miss them. And he could really use Patriot missiles. I will say, we have to remind ourselves of one thing. President Trump has done the right thing and kept intelligence support flowing to Ukraine. And he needs to keep doing that and then bringing the pressure on Putin. And I think that there is an opportunity at the end of this spring-summer offensive for a legitimate discussion of cessation of hostilities, but only when we bring the pressure on Putin.
Mark Montgomery, thanks for joining us as always in the Threat Status Podcast.
Thanks, guys.
And it's time now for Threat of the Week, our weekly segment here in the show where we each identify a threat, whether it's here at home domestically or in some corner of the world that we think is impacting U.S. national security right now this week. As you listen to the show, Guy, what do you have for us as your Threat of the Week?
My threat of the week, Ben, is something we didn't really get into with Mark Montgomery here, but it's that oil prices are going to go much higher because of the war with Iran. My prediction is that the situation is going to become the worst that it's been for the global economy since the 1970s oil crisis. I'm not here to be a pessimist. I'm a journalist who covers global affairs and global crisis and have been for well over 2 decades now. And there are energy market experts that I read that are predicting $200 a barrel oil over the coming weeks. That could bring U.S. gas prices north of $5, $6, maybe more dollars a gallon. And maybe it will only be temporary. I mean, likely U.S. reserves will keep prices from totally skyrocketing inside the U.S. And maybe it is all totally worth it in order to rid the world of the threat of a nuclear-armed Iran. But think on it. The point is that the shock of having the Strait of Hormuz shuttered or stopped of regular oil traffic, that shock is actually just starting. The last ships that went through the strait before Iran basically stopped traffic are just now reaching markets in Europe and Asia. So the real shock and the worst of it is most likely yet to come, and particularly for the Europeans, for the Indians, the Filipinos, South Korea, Japan, maybe China, Russia, and so on. So that's my threat of the week.
Yeah, we'll see how it plays out, of course, here in the U.S. now that it's spring and summer and travel seasons are approaching for families all across the country. So $6 gas is certainly a harrowing prospect. My threat of the week is AI generated content, and in this case specifically music. Now, you could say, what's the direct link between AI generated music and national security? But I would just posit that, in my opinion, this is kind of a vivid example of the blurring of the lines between actual human-created content and content made by AI, and that could have impacts on a society in a time of crisis if an adversary uses this kind of tech to promote false information, or it could essentially become a weapon as part of a broader influence campaign run by, for example, the Chinese Communist Party through TikTok or some other avenue. But listen, I'm a musician, and this particular story really caught my attention this week because a blues singer named Eddie Dalton has 3 songs right now in the iTunes top 10, including the #1 song, Another Day Old. Eddie Dalton's not a real artist. This is AI-generated music. It's believed to be the work of a South Carolina content creator named Dallas Little, who apparently has been producing a lot of other very believable and very successful songs and videos. So I think this story speaks for itself in a lot of ways. I don't know what it means from a cultural perspective. We can't go see Eddie Dalton live because he's not a real musician. We might all like these songs in a vacuum, but it's...
I since you told me right before we taped this that about this Eddie Dalton thing, I went and listened to that song, and I thought the lyrics were vapid.
I mean... I can't say I disagree. It's the #1 song on Apple iTunes, so maybe that says something about where we are musically as a culture, but it just, I don't know what the experience of Eddie Dalton is. This isn't like listening to the White Album or Led Zeppelin 4. I mean, let's be honest. But again, from a national security perspective, this is a minefield, I think, especially for young people. I mean, again, now an adversary like China could not only promote content that essentially could make the U.S. look bad, for example, and advocate for a Chinese system, but it's becoming not only possible, but potentially kind of easy to create the actual content itself in the form of music, video, stories, movies, books, podcasts that people listen to and don't even probably know that it's generated by AI. So that specifically is why it's my threat of the week, and is, I think, probably going to continue to be a threat for weeks, months, and years to come, certainly. So with that, Guy, it was great to have you back, of course, on the show this week, and a huge thanks to Mark Montgomery of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies for that really good interview. And most of all, thanks to all of you, of course, our listeners. Please go ahead, hit that subscribe button, share with all your friends, and we'll be back next week on the Threat Status Podcast.